be.
The member for Ottawa Centre.
Well, thank you, Speaker. It's an honor to rise in this House today. Not only as a member of the opposition, but I have to say as the seniors critic for this province. I know I'm only 48 years old, but one of the reasons I was very happy to be given this particular critic portfolio, Speaker, is that I was actually raised at a formative year by my grandparents and taught that it's important to listen to our elders. So I've had the great fortune as the seniors critic in the last 18 months to listen to seniors from across Ontario. And one of the seniors I've had the great fortune to listen to is Bill Hillier, who lives in a neighborhood called Cardinal Creek in the riding of Orleans. And Mr. Hillier is one of those who deputed to the traveling committee that wanted to hear from Ontarians on this Bill 159, which is intended, as I understand from my friends, to increase consumer protection. But what Mr. Hillier's story revealed to the traveling committee and revealed to the government, certainly revealed to me as seniors critic in the opposition, is that we are failing consumers. And we have been failing consumers in the home building industry since the year Tarion was created, 1976. And why is that, Speaker? And what did Mr. Hillier have to tell us about that? Well, I want to read from a news article that my colleague MPP Rakocevic for Humber River Black Creek cited in his terrific one-hour lead on this particular bill. It's revelatory because it was written in the exact same year, 1976, that Tarion was created. The author was Jacob Ziegel, a U of T professor of law, and what he wrote about Tarion when it was founded was this: the provisions in the bill are neither novel nor objectionable in principle. They are indeed widely guaranteed or regarded as necessary for the operation of a successful warranty schemes, the various things Tarion was to do. What is without precedent in Ontario consumer protection legislation is the nature of a body entrusted with the administration of important powers contained in them. For it is not the Ministry of Consumer and Commercial Relations or any government agency that is entrusted with this task. It will be a non-profit corporation of undetermined composition incorporated under the Ontario Corporations Act and at best only indirectly accountable for its actions to the legislature. There is no secrecy about the reasons for this feature of the Act. It is a surrender to the long-sought goal of HUDAC, the Housing and Urban Development Association of Canada. The association has argued for several years that warranty schemes for new homes should be administered by the builders themselves and that the construction industry should have majority representation on the corporation to be established for this purpose. In earlier discussions involving the establishment of a national home warranty scheme, the federal government refused to accede to this demand. There are strong indications the Ontario government will prove more compliant. There you have it, Speaker. On the very year that Tarion was brought into being, one of the more informed voices in Ontario was warning us, be careful. The home building industry, and we aren't impugning the whole home building industry, the vast majority of operators in that sector, some are family members of mine, are fine. But we don't let industries this significant regulate themselves. It ought to be the job of government to do that. That's what Professor Ziegel was warning us about. And to take us to the neighborhood of Cardinal Creek, to take us to Mr. Hillier's home. It was in 2017 when him and his spouse had purchased a beautiful home. I've seen it myself, beautiful from the outside. They went down to the basement because they were having people over for Christmas dinner. And they noticed an enormous pool of water in the basement. And understandably, Mr. Hillier began to ask himself, where's this water coming from? Is this a brand new home? I don't see a leak in the ceiling. I can't see any leak in the foundation of this brand new basement. But in fact, Speaker, what they found was massive ice in the walls, which then turned into mold. And Mr. Hillier, and hi Bill, if you're watching this, Mr. Hillier right now is living with cancer. And what's worrisome about this story, despite the fact that Mr. Hillier and his family have to go through that, so many other families in Ontario have to go through, is that this is ominously reminiscent of another story involving Tarion. That my friend, who the former Minister for Consumer and Government Relations, MPP Walker, met with someone, if you can believe it, Speaker, who fought Terry on for 27 years. 27 years, and took his own life. And in the last moments of that life was battling with cancer. MPP Walker, to his credit, did a press conference when he committed on behalf of this government to fix Terrion, which he alleged was broken. I agree with him. He did a press conference with the spouse of that gentleman. So I guess I would say, as the seniors critic, Speaker, on behalf of not just seniors but all people in this province, we cannot allow seniors and their families to suffer. They've built this province. Everything around us, everything, every single brick in this building, every public institution we have because of grandmothers and grandfathers. But right now, what I can tell you with confidence is that someone, Mr. Hillier, is sitting in a home in Cardinal Creek, which is flawed and faulty, struggling with cancer, worried about the fact that that very home may be making his health condition worse. I want us to marinate that for a second. I want that to seep in. Because I can tell you something. Mr. Howard Bogak, apologies Mr. Bogak if I mispronounce your surname, who was Terrion's CEO, in last year earned a salary of $681,000, had a car allowance of $87,000, and with the Attorney General of this province, thanks to MPP Gates, who made the point of insisting under the previous government that the Attorney General look into Terrion and fix the Terrion mess. Thank you, MPP Gates. But the Attorney General found it is not that Terrion is being weighed down by a culture of executives rewarding themselves. It is also inclined, rather like bad apples in the insurance industry, to incentivize people working for Terrion who deny claims to people like Mr. Hillier. The Attorney General found that between 2014 and 2018, Terrion refused over 9,700 requests for defects in homes to be built because the homeowners missed these tight 30-day deadlines that Terrion insists upon. 1,300 of those people, Speaker, missed that deadline by a single day, often due to delays in correspondence, not to concerns from the particular nature of the defects, the severity of the defects. I was happy because of the Canadians for Properly Built Homes, a terrific organization that's great work in this particular field that's helped Mr. Hillier and other people like him. Myself and MPP Rakosevich, we went to a large meeting in Orleans, down the road from the Cardinal Creek community, where so many homes have been improperly built. I met with so many homeowners who confided in me privately, Joel, we would love to struggle against Terrion publicly, as Mr. Hillier has done, but we're worried what that would mean to the property values of our homes. If we complain, we won't be able to sell our homes. Can you imagine, Speaker, like for the most important investment one will ever make in their life, to be put into that position? But nonetheless, there was over 200 people in that room. Mr. Hillier spoke fantastically. So did Karen Somerville. Karen, if you're watching this, thank you for all your work for justice on this file. And it really struggled. I tried to think on my way back to downtown Ottawa and later on my way back to the legislature, how do I understand this culture? What has happened? You know, what Professor Ziegel said in 1976, probably be most apt, but what has happened since? And this is difficult subject material, so I'm going to struggle for levity, if you'll allow me, Speaker, with some of my time left. I know there are some people in this House who are suffering Toronto Maple Leafs fans, and you suffered for a long time. And if there's something Toronto Maple Leafs fans understand, Speaker, it's the culture of ineptitude and self-serving nature that happened under Howard Ballard's leadership. Speaker, we're talking about an owner of a hockey team, a major crown jewel of this country, who records show charges were laid, convictions were prosecuted, not only took money for this hockey team for himself, but doled out money for limousines for his daughter's wedding, bought motorcycles for his son. Like, if you can imagine all those players, all those coaches, all those fans who for years showed up in that hockey rink supporting that team. And this is what Mr. Ballard was doing with their money. right? So Mr. Ballard gets convicted, sent to Kingston for a short stint in the Kingston pen, short, and then allowed, as he described it, motel living conditions with a television and steak dinners and photos with corrections officers. He operated with impunity, Speaker. Operated with impunity. And I would hazard a guess that despite the great work, and I'm not a Maple Leafs fan if I'm honest with you, but despite the great work of the fan base supporting that team, the coaches, the players since, they are still living under that legacy. They have not had a reckoning with that legacy. I think the same is true with Terrion. You have a corporation that for some reason was allowed to operate outside the orbit of government on probably the most important investment opportunity for consumers in this province. Some of us in this House may have personal savings and capital gains savings and whatever savings that would be larger than a house. I suspect many of us won't. The home is the biggest thing that any of us ever invest in. And we have set up since 1976 an entity which allows the home building industry, until recently, to regulate itself. The majority of the executive governing body of Terrion, until recently, was the home building industry. And that's where I'll give my friends in government some credit here. I appreciate the fact that you've changed the governing body of Terrion to reduce the impact of the home building industry having the plurality of votes there. Fine. Great. But what remains worrisome for me, Speaker, is this. We still have a situation in which Terrion as an entity is not democratically accountable to the people of Ontario. There's still a firewall between Terrion and us. And we have to ring the bell pretty hard in this place to get noticed. And the Canadians for Properly Built Homes, Mr. Hillier and others, they have to ring the bell pretty hard for us to get noticed. Now, again, I was taught, Speaker, when I went to school, it wasn't good enough if I saw injustice for me to just rail into the wind. I had to try to understand my adversary. I had to try to understand how they thought. So I'm going to give Terrion the benefit of the doubt. I can use this now, I'm told, by the standing orders. And I'm going to quote what one of their policy folks said when MPP Walker, Minister Thompson, MPP Rakocevic, MPP Gates, and others have pressed from within this place questions on their executive compensation scheme. Because it seems ridiculous on the face of it, right, Speaker, the notion that someone working for the people of Ontario should be entitled to a salary that is 3 times what the Premier of this province makes, but I digress. What Melanie Kearns said to the CBC in response to this question about executive compensation was the following. We use market salary surveys and independent external HR compensation experts to review our board and executive compensation programs, and we benchmark our compensation against Ontario's other administrative authorities as well as comparable public sector organizations, she wrote. And she went on to say, according to the CBC, that the members' compensation on the executive of Terrion is reviewed every 2 years, and with the exception of the board and committee chairs, the board's remuneration hasn't changed since 2005. So, if I'm understanding what Ms. Kearns was telling us through the CBC, the fact that executive compensation has been bloated at Terrion since 2005, the fact that $4 million was spent on its executives alone and that Mr. Bogok received over $681,000 and that has somehow been held flat for the last 14 years is supposed to satisfy Mr. Hillier, Ms. Somerville, MPP Rakocevic, MPP Gates, and others who've led this fight. All that tells me is that there has been a massive problem of outpaced compensation of Terrion executives for a long time, even if it's been not keeping pace with inflation. It's certainly not going to give Mr. Hillier any comfort, Speaker. It's not going to give right now, if you think of what, if you allow me the brief digression, Speaker, if you think of what we're going through as a province, as a country right now with the COVID-19 scare and the need for us to keep each other safe, I actually woke up this morning, my first thought was for all the food service workers in this province who, because they, right now, if they don't have the capacity to call in sick, are being compelled to go to work sick, and they could carry a lot of fear in their heart on their way to work about what they could be transmitting to us, Speaker. Fear in their heart. I'm going to make a guess, Speaker, that people working in that industry are not well compensated, probably not full-time, probably don't have benefits, don't have a lot of stake. And Ms. Kern's assertion to us that, oh, well, we've held executive compensation relatively flat since 2005, even if our executive makes 3 times the salary of the Premier. Okay. That just shows the entitlement in this corporation. Because that's what it is. It is an entitled corporation we've allowed to develop and exist for decades. My friends in government have said it's broken. I agree. But if Tarion is broken, how is the answer allowing members of that same Tarion management team to regain control? Mr. Bogak is on his way out. But the people continuing to run the operation are part of the same Tarion bureaucracy that existed there for years. Okay, if my grandmother was here, Speaker, who I've spoken about before when you've been here, my Presbyterian grandmother, whom I love, she would say, you do not let the fox guard the hen house. You do not. You do not let people who have ripped consumers off for years and rewarded themselves retain control of a corporation that has such an important role in the lives of people in this province. That doesn't do justice to Mr. Hillier. It doesn't do justice to what is right. I want to say something else about Bill 159 because, of course, it's about much more than Tarion. And my friend MPP Rashid talked about this yesterday. Part of what this bill will do in ticket sales is ensure that commercial transactions are done in Canadian dollars. My friend MPP Rakocevic said to committee in his 1-hour lead on this issue that he brought amendments to the relevant committee on Bill 159 asking for ticket sales and resales to not exceed 50% of their advertised price. That amendment was defeated by my friends. It's not been accepted by the government. And here's what's happening to ticketed events right across this country. Indeed, from what I can tell, across the world. Scalpers and ticket originators are colluding to restrict supply of tickets. And you have situations where last year, Speaker, when our Toronto Raptors did that magnificent run on the way to the World Championship, front row court seats, which I will never be able to afford, but nonetheless, front row court seats at those games were $13,000 each. And here's the rub, Speaker. It's not only that these tickets are the province of the most wealthy folks. Get this. Because of federal tax exemptions that exist, not here, but at the federal level, some corporations and some wealthy individuals will be going to those Raptor games that have inflated ticket prices because this legislation doesn't go far enough and writing them off on all of us. The tax expenditure covers 50%. 50% of the values of the ticket, Speaker. That's what people will get to write off. Can you imagine? In a province where we have a child poverty rate, where we have 1 of 7 people, as my friend MPP McLeod often has said in the past, living in poverty, that we allow a situation where people can write off 50% of the cost of meals and entertainment expenses, like a Raptors game, a ticket that costs $13,000 because this bill doesn't go far enough. We let that happen. We let that happen in a context where, as my friend Saul Mamakwa and MPP Mamakwa has mentioned, we have boil water advisories. We have unpotable water. We have people living in abject poverty. We have a suicide crisis across Indigenous lands. And yet we let an executive write off the cost of a $13,000 ticket to a Raptors game? What is going on with us? I understand there was a prayer breakfast this morning, Speaker. I'm sad to have missed it. We got to pray for something deep. We got to pray for something really deep. If we're allowing a province where people can write off 50% of a $13,000 ticket and Indigenous kids are taking their own life, Indigenous communities do not have potable water, kids are living in poverty, I implore upon my friends in government, show some leadership in this aspect of your bill. Put that cap on the resale value of tickets. Tell the scalping, ticket originating community, do not gouge sports fans or entertainment consumers. And absolutely don't let executives write off the cost of that and make us pay for it. That is the most egregious part of it. Speaker, send a letter to your counterparts in the federal government. Tell them the gravy train has to stop. Tell them that just because you're wealthy, you don't get to ask the rest of Ontario, who have real needs, to pay for your exaggerated lifestyles. So I just want to say in closing, Speaker, again I want to give thanks for people in this House who've carried this fight for a long time. I didn't mention MPP Rosario Marchese, who was a critic on this file for many years, MPP Gates, MPP Rakocevic. I take to heart what my friends in government have said about Tarion being broken. Fix it. Also fix the ticket industry. This is your chance. You're the ones with the reins. Use them for the wisdom of the people. Thank you.